Well folks, as promised, we're going to talk about how to build these arbors. This one here we have planted with the winter squash and summer squash that hopefully they're popping up. Hopefully they'll be starting to climb soon. And then in this one we have with our automated planters our scarlet runner beans. Over here on the south side of the garage we planted some morning glories. And then in our newly planted raised beds that we looked at last week, we have our cucumbers starting to come up. So here's pretty much everything we need to build one of these arbors. I have a piece of 10-foot 1x6 cedar. And again, if you want to use 2x4s, just get a 10-foot 2x4 that's pretty clear, that doesn't have a lot of knots in it, and nice and straight, and rip it on the table saw. About 5/8 inch thick strips, and you have enough to make an arbor. And then we have 4 of the 1/2 inch metal conduit. We have the 2 inch by 4 inch wire mesh. This is 3 feet wide. We have 1 inch lath screws that are self-tapping. We have some metal strapping, a carriage bolt, 1/4 inch carriage bolt, some 8 inch cable ties, and a piece of 2 foot by 8 inch by 3/4 inch thick plywood. With that plywood, we need to make our tubing bender. Don't be scared, it's not that hard, so let's do it. So, here's one we already made. Now this one is a 24 inch board that was 8 inches high. Every 6 inches we will draw a line using a straight edge. At the edges it'll be 4 1/4 inches up. We go in 6 inches, let's measure up 7 inches. In the center it'll already be 8 inches, the length of the board. And then again on the other side 6 inches over, up 7, and then again on the other edge 4 1/4 inches. So that's basically how I laid it out on this board. Up 4 1/4, 6 inches in, 7 inches up, 6 inches in, 8 inches up, another 6 inches, back down to 7, and then 4 1/4 on the other side. Now, if you're working by yourself, we're going to have to put some brads in there and bend our batten around it. Now a batten can be anything that's flexible. Flexible, but strong enough that it will sweep a nice arc. Sometimes a yardstick will work okay. And if you have an assistant with you, you can just bend it so that it hits all of those marks. It hits the 8 inch at the top, it hits the 7 inch marks, the 4 1/4 on each edge, and then while you're holding it, have your assistant mark it. Sweep that arc. You can use other material. This is a piece of, for paneling, just a piece of edging, and that makes a nice batten too. But since I generally am working by myself, I will pound little finishing nails in just inside the 7 inch, 4 1/4, and then I'll put one on the other side. Why don't I pause this and actually do that for you. So let's put a nail just inside that 4 1/4, just inside the 7 inch mark. We don't need one at the 8 inch. Down there. And just like that. And then, since I only have 2 hands, I'm going to stick another one right there. And that way I can stick my yardstick in there and then sweep it like that. And so then I can mark it myself without an assistant. Now that we got our shape cut out just using the saber saw, and try to cut on the outside of the line, we're going to add our strap that will secure the conduit as we bend it. And for that, we're just going to use inexpensive metal strapping. And so what we want to do is measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 1/4 inch holes, and then cut that off. Like that. And then if you have a scrap piece of conduit, you can, on the center hole, center that on the top of the conduit and just bend it around it. And we are going to mount that right on the end, like that. And it's going to mount so that the second hole up from the bottom on each side, about half of that will be covered with the wood and about half not. So just to kind of verify, just stick your conduit in there. And then we're going to drill a 1/4 inch hole through there like that, and then that's where our carriage bolt comes into play. This is I think 1.5 inch carriage bolt, and we mount that so the head will be on the side that it'll be facing down. We just secure that. Get a 7/16 wrench. Tighten it up and draw that head nice and tight right into there. You might need a little persuasion. Always use the proper tool for the job. There. Now we're ready to mount this on that trailer. Now I like working on this old trailer bed. It's just a nice work surface, and I can drill a bunch of holes in it. It doesn't bother me at all. So we'll mount the one that I'd already made that already has the mounting holes in it. And then we'll bend some pipe. We got our bender mounted on the trailer. Now we're going to measure 45 inches down from the end. Next, we're going to stick the conduit right so that it's flush with the end of the bender. And then, kind of like rowing a boat, we're going to pull, not so far that it touches up against, but just slide it up a foot or so, and make sure that the end is flat, flush with the trailer, not sticking up like that, or you'll end up with a corkscrew shape. So keep it flat. If you have trouble keeping it flat, have an assistant hold that end down as you're bending. But just by twisting the conduit, you should be able to keep it nice and flat. But just push it up a foot or so, bend it again, not so far that it goes all the way to the end of the bender. You don't want to get a crimp in it. And then when you get to your 45-inch mark, you're going to bend it so that that 45-inch mark hits right up against the end of the bender. Just like that. Now, this is one advantage of working on a trailer bed. Now you can use the trailer as a guide here. Put it up against so that the straight part is flush with the edge of the trailer bed, and then check at the top here that this should be level with the top of the trailer. I see it's still bending up a little bit, so we're going to put it back in the bender. Go to our 45-inch mark and bend it just a touch past the end of the bender. And that should give you a nice flat top there. We can do that one more time. If you want to see that again, it's actually kind of fun. By the way, once we get into bending tubing, the next video I think I'm going to show you how to make the hoops for our raised beds. I neglected to talk about, that's a big benefit of raised beds, is that you can basically turn them into mini greenhouses. Put row cover over them or whatever. You know, most people just use PVC pipe and stuff, and that's fine. I did that in the past too, but they don't hold up in the sun very long. They're not very sturdy. They're not all that attractive. But you bend some hoops out of 1/2-inch tubing. They're just like giant Paul Bunyan's croquet hoops. And, you know, at the end of the season, you just stack them up or hang them on the wall in the pole barn or whatever, but they make a really nice hoop. We've got another bender, basically the same thing, just a little bit of a steeper arc to it, and we can bend some of those, but that's another video. Okay, stick it into the end. Remember our 45-inch mark. We want to be able to see that. Pull it towards us. Slide it forward about a foot, pull it towards you, slide it forward about a foot, 45-inch mark, right to the end. And remember, we need to kind of tweak it just a tiny bit to get us square. You have to get one of those cordless microphones. Okay, that looks good. I set the rip fence 1 3/4 measured to an inside tooth. And I already ripped one just to make sure this cedar was going to be stable enough that it wouldn't spring apart when we ripped it, which is a risk. You know, that's why you can just rip 2x4s or buy lath or whatever you use for your lath on your arbors is your choice, but we like the cedar now. So I ripped this one already and it turned out really nice and straight. So let's rip this last piece and then cut them up. Okay, I cut all the wood on the miter saw here, and then I just laid them all out on this work surface. And they all, you know, really nice and straight. And then I had just taken a, I knew that my holes for the screws should be in 1 1/4 inches from the ends on each side. So I just made a spacer board that I used to mark 1 1/4 inches. And then I just pretty much guess at the center. And then I'm going to take each of the boards over to this drill press, and I have a 7/16 brad point bit in there, but you could use a spade bit or something. And I'm gonna drill some, about a 1/4 inch or 1/3 of an inch countersink hole, so the head of the screw will go down far enough so the 1-inch screws will go into the 1/2 inch conduit. Next, we're going to cut our mesh. Now, dealing with this stuff is not a lot of fun. Any kind of wire mesh that's rolled up, it tends to take on a life of its own. So I like to tame it a little bit, and I clamp it down on that end of the trailer, and I have 2 of the rectangles, so 2 of the 2-inch sections are hanging over the trailer, which is 8 feet long, so it works out well for cutting this. I cut them each about 100 inches because I want to get 3 arbors out of a 50-foot roll. Now, it's not only because I'm cheap, but I also want that space at the bottom because we put planters underneath the arbors, and it still allows about 8 inches to be sunk into the ground. So we're going to use the angle grinder to cut this. It's the easiest way to do it. And when we cut it, on one end we'll leave the wire from the previous cut. So this end will cut fairly flush with the cross wires, because at the top we're going to bend over those pieces of wire and kind of lock it all together. Now, they generally give you a little bit more than 50 feet, so you can do this with each one. So we have 50 squares on each section, and it ends up to be about 8 foot 4 inches or so. So let's cut this, but first, and I'm serious about this, these things are nothing to mess around with. Serious eye protection and ear protection. That's all there is to it. Now, there's one thing I neglected to mention at the start of another piece of materials that we need, and that's 1/2 inch PEX plastic water line. So we're going to cut pieces about 6 inches long, and then mark it at 3 inches too. Okay, so these go in the ends. Now, depending on the brand of 1/2 inch conduit, some of these fit more snugly than others. So if it's a little tight fit, you might need to get a round file and kind of enlarge the hole, or take the little burr off, or get it so that they slide in a little easier. If you notice, the mesh is about 3/4 of an inch past the end of the conduit here. It's going to lap a little bit over on the top. So we're going to install this piece of wood so that it laps over the end of the conduit just a bit. And we're not going to tighten those completely down because we still need to slide the other piece, the other half into there, so we'll leave these a little bit looser. We just want to secure that piece of PEX in there. So what I did, now installing these, I started at the bottom and I put in the first lath, and then I put a cable tie on each side about halfway to kind of, so I could remove the spring clamps. And then I went 11 spaces, count 11 spaces, and then put the next one. Count 11 spaces, put the next board, 11, put the next one, and the top it'll be like 12 or 13, but it works out pretty good. It's not exact, but it's an arbor. Okay, now for this side, I did the same thing. I started at the bottom with the first slat, went 11 spaces between the slats and set the second one. And then I put a cable tie where there was a spring clamp so I could take the clamp off, and just worked my way up until I got to the end here. Now the way I'd set this side, I'm starting with the mesh back about 3/4 of an inch from the end of the conduit. And this is the end with the open wires, with just the bare wires. The other end has bare wires at the bottom. We can either fold those up or just snip them off. I'll probably just cut them off. So now what we need to do is probably loosen these screws a little bit more. So that we can slide our PEX tubing into the other conduit. The wire ends I just looped them back around the other end, and then just threw a cable tie over there on the top. So I think we're pretty much set to stand this thing up. Now, as you can see, it's pretty tall. And there's a lot of space down here. But remember, a lot of this is going to go down into the ground. But let me show you why we like that space. Now we made these pretty much the same way we made the raised beds. The only difference is they're a foot high. And they'll fit right between the legs of the arbor. Now the other thing they'll do is they will conceal 2 buckets. If a person wanted to have a garden stream, just a bucket planter system, it would house both the float valve box and 2 buckets, and you just run a tube to your water supply, and these could conceal self-watering planters. So you could plop this arbor and these planters pretty much anywhere. Even on a patio or whatever. You just want to secure the arbor if it's on a patio. But that's the idea. So I think that's about it for today. So until next time, this is Mark with Backwood Basics. So remember, let's grow together.